How am I going to record museum labels? If you're anything like me, when you go to a museum, you look at a painting for a bit. Yeah, maybe it's cool. Yeah, maybe you feel something. But the real ticket is this thing. The info card. Placard? I seriously love these things. They're always packed with so much information, written in this cold, clinical voice unique to this type of writing. It's an art form in and of itself. The magical world of museum labels is one of the only places where the average person is exposed to absolutely crazy phrases like, the artist stages a confrontation between reality and perception, or this piece is an experiment in transience and ephemerality. That's good. The hidden sanctuary where you read of the asking of urgent questions into class and race relations. That's right. Outside a museum, you'd need a subscription to an art journal to read language like that. Here, it's printed on foam core, available in 2-paragraph bursts, waiting for anyone who bothers to lean in. By the way, who actually writes these? And how do I get that job? And why are so many of them written in this grandiose, dramatic, arguably pretentious writing style? And also, what are they even called? Because I don't really think it's placards.
So it depends. I think a lot of museums agree that it could be exhibition text, didactic text is really popular, especially when it's like rooted in academic research.
This is my friend Bekah. She just graduated with a degree in curatorial studies and has worked in exhibitions and installation at the Woman Made Gallery in Chicago for the past 3 years, in addition to a decade of experience as an exhibiting artist. She's also worked as a gallery assistant, volunteer coordinator, researcher, exhibit designer, and a whole bunch of other art-related things, and is kind of the perfect person to ask this weird question about museum labels.
So depending on the type of institution, the scale, so really big institutions like the Art Institute of Chicago, which is here, it's a really massive collaborative effort by a bunch of different departments. Maybe like a small house museum might not refer to it in that same way. It's it really depends on the size of the museum, the context. Didactic text is what I would think.
So they're not really called placards, at least not officially. She brought up an interesting point where the terms they use for labels might differ based on the size of the institution. And since I was curious who actually writes these things, I wonder if that differs depending on the size of the museum too. So who does write them?
Most of the time, it's the responsibility of the interpretation department. Interpreters are kind of responsible for that, interpreting artwork or interpreting the content. So I'd say it's a collaboration between interpretation departments, curatorial departments, like directors of communications who are in charge of customer-facing or audience-facing materials. It can also be about museum brand, so remaining consistent in how you're portraying. Some places will want to be more conversational, and other places might be more focused on academic, really information, fact-dense.
So it sounds like I won't be a professional labor writer labor? Are you fucking kidding me? It sounds like I won't be a professional label writer anytime soon, but you might have caught something she said earlier.
It can also be about museum brand, so remaining consistent in how you're portraying.
Branding? That sounds suspicious. You might start to wonder if labels have ever been a source of controversy. And of course they have. The British Museum is somewhat infamous for being a catalogue of stolen artifacts from former colonies, but what if I told you they also lied about it too? In the past, many artifacts like the Parthenon marbles or Benin bronzes used to have didactic text that downplayed relevant colonial history. They'd use language like rescued or obtained, when many cultures they took these artifacts from would probably use a different word. Starting in the 80s, scholars and activists started publicly criticizing these labels for their inaccuracies. Under immense public pressure, the British Museum slowly started rewriting their labels to mention colonial violence and the origin of their artifacts. A similar story unfolded at the Met, and with some of their museum placards. Didactic text. You might notice this line at the bottom of many labels with a brief note about who gave the piece to the museum. And for years, many Met exhibits were sponsored by the Sackler family, and so had their names emblazoned on the bottom of many labels. If you know anything about the Sacklers, it probably stems from this book, Empire of Pain. The Sackler family ran Purdue Pharma, which manufactured and aggressively marketed OxyContin, a key drug in the emergence of the opioid epidemic. The New Yorker described them like so. The Sackler dynasty's ruthless marketing of painkillers has generated billions of dollars and millions of addicts. Many activists like Nan Goldin protested that the museum was complicit in a practice called art washing, basically using art to improve the public image of something terrible. Museums like the Met have started removing the Sackler name from placards and signs after massive pressure from the public. Now, you could argue that, unlike the last example, this is technically removing relevant history from the didactic text, because despite their actions, the Sacklers really did provide those pieces. Or you might counter that including the names of the benefactors on a label is a privilege, not a right, one that's forfeited when the interests of a museum differ from its donors. I'll leave that one to you to figure out. Looking on the optimistic side, in a way, we all write museum labels.
Do you have any examples of when the writing was really skewed to match the museum's interests in branding?
Yeah, so Soft Light Switches Ghost version 2, which is at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's a soft sculpture. Klaus Oldenburg. For a long while, when that was on view, it was included in the didactic text that his wife is a major collaborator and is responsible for fabricating a lot of his art.
Yeah.
In this case, she was entirely responsible for the creation of it, creating it, sewing it. So it's a stuffed fabric sculpture of light switches on a wall, but her name is not as well known. And so even though she was in that text, she was removed sometime in the past 3 years. So kind of because of branding, so recognizability, including the more well-known name, the name that you have a lot more of in your collection, rather than using up words to...
Sure. So they took her name out.
Yeah, this actually happens a lot with artists and fabricators or women that were their contemporaries. So
I thought it would have been the other way around.
that's kind of what you'd think. A lot of museums are moving in that direction.
The examples that I read online just from doing a search were the British Museum.
Oh, the British Museum, you could talk endlessly about.
So in addition to the label controversies of the British Museum, there's also many examples of artists whose contributions were essentially erased from the labels talking about their artwork. Stories like these highlight the importance of framing in art. While it would be nice to imagine a world where art is interpreted in isolation, context-free, the information that surrounds it can be so important to understanding what's going on. It would be like using Instagram if they banned captions. Speaking of which, didactic text is obviously not the only example of text that serves to frame a separate main body of art. There's a whole term for this, paratext, coined by a French literary theorist named
Gérard Genet.
It describes the material that surrounds a published main text.
Genet.
It was mainly referring to written publications, so he cites examples like book covers, the title itself, front matter, back matter, and footnotes. These added elements form a frame for the main text, and can change the reception of a text or its interpretation by the public. In this way, captions on Instagram posts are basically mini museum labels, except the writing style for a caption is a lot more open-ended, and you're probably not trying to be didactic. We're mostly trying to seem cool or attractive. The title and description of a YouTube video is another good example of paratext. It's not part of the main thing, the video, but it's vital for framing it. I always found it funny those YouTube videos with titles like Ben Shapiro destroys woke liberal, or liberals might use the reverse. Because these titles kind of give away something about the content itself, or rather that the content itself doesn't matter. The success of this packaging tells you, despite ostensibly being about politics, the viewers don't really care about the topic. They're just here to see somebody lose an argument.
Have you ever seen a label that completely changed how you saw the piece?
I'd say yes. There are definitely artists who believe the artwork speaks for itself, death to the artist.
Yeah.
I don't need to say anything for you to have this experience or to understand something about it. I can appreciate that, but I really get a lot out of learning about the context of making. So a really good example, actually one of the first examples of this interaction where I read about it and it changed my perception, is the works of Felix Gonzalez Torres.
Mm-hmm.
He was a conceptual artist working with themes of life and mortality and health, and you might have seen them before. He has installations where they look like piles of candy. There's one at the Geffen, I believe, and then there's one at the Art Institute, and it kind of travels around. It's like very inviting for a lot of like young children to come up and take a piece of candy with the context of Portrait of Ross in LA, for example, which is about his partner Ross, who died of AIDS in the 80s.
Oh my God.
Representing the ideal healthy weight of his partner Ross. I think 145 pounds of candy, and then throughout the day or through the weeks, people come up and take it and it depletes. So it's kind of thinking about like his health worsening, losing weight, but at the same time, you're taking joy in like this symbolic Ross. It kind of, when you think about this pile of candy as representative or symbolic of a person, it's about like taking joy or taking a bit of him with you, contributing to his immortality in this strange sense, because the pile of candy gets refilled and Ross lives on in that sense, but also more complicated feelings of communion or are we a parasite? Are we taking away from him? So even though it's an untitled work, the text will tell you this is symbolic. This is a person that you're interacting with. This is a portrait of Ross in LA instead of a pile of candy.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt right here because I just found something incredible while editing. An artist called Aaron Moore apparently put together a series of museum labels based on things that people said while they were viewing this specific piece of art, Portrait of Ross in LA. Except the labels themselves were the artwork. They were displayed in their own exhibit later on. Here are some examples of the labels that she made. What a coincidence.
Yeah, wow. I can't imagine just like grabbing a candy and then you read that and you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
You're like, oh, what am I? Am I doing something bad here? At least the feelings get more complicated once you know the context.
Paratext is so important for the framing of content, and I know it's so important because sometimes I read a museum label for a different piece and get confused which thing it describes, which gives me a completely wrong impression. The other day at the Met Cloisters, I saw this crucifixion sculpture and thought that this didactic text, which says angel, described the thing. But I was like, wait, that's not an angel. Isn't that Jesus? And then I realized the actual label was this one, and oh, that makes a lot more sense. What's a cloister, by the way? Cloisters are like hallways that surround a courtyard. And that way, cloisters are like paratext for the courtyard. Without it, it would just be a field of grass or some garden, and you know what, this is a stupid-ass metaphor, I'm gonna stop there. The body is the paratext for the mind-ass philosophizing. Go ahead and quote me on that. Post me to this, see if I care. Get it twisted. Anyways, when you examine labels from the angle of paratext, along with the context of a museum and the framing that labels are trying to provide, their strange writing style starts to make sense. In addition to being teaching tools, they're also there to set the stage. In an article titled "What Makes a Great Museum Label," museum interpreter Anna Faherty says that the best museum labels anticipate and answer visitors' unspoken questions about the artwork or object they accompany, and they forge emotional connections with the readers. She quotes Swarupa Anila, a director of interpretive engagement and a juror in the exhibition label writing competition. A brilliant label sweeps you into a bodily experience. Eyes widen, breath stops, skin rises to goosebumps, heartbeat quickens. You look around and feel you're seeing a world that never existed before that moment. That measured cadence, carefully chosen abstractions, and ambiguity, all of it reproduces the museum's inherent pathos, where lofty ideas and contrasting themes dominate the room. The labels help position you in that open, intellectual headspace, ready to accept ideas in art that you might not in other contexts. Basically, they give you permission to think weird, like an artist, because they're also written weird. Yesterday, I was walking back home from the gym and saw a free art exhibit on the way home, so I just had to check it out. The exhibit was run entirely by high school seniors. I really wanted to ask who writes the labels in this exhibit, and luckily one of the employees from the Elm Foundation, who supports this exhibit, was generous enough to give his take. Hi, so I was just wondering, who actually writes the didactic text?
For Edward R. Murrow High School Senior Showcase, it's all by the students. So there's a curation class produced by the Elm Foundation. The students, they have to come up with the show title, a description of why they're doing the show. They do the full installation, all the artwork and all the text. So basically everything you see here is by 17-year-olds, generally seniors in high school.
Do they do this every year?
Yes, so this is our 5th annual for Edward R. Murrow High School, and we've done our 2nd annual LaGuardia High School.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I didn't realize until I got home, but I never got his name. If you ever see this, thanks again.
All right. So last question.
Okay.
If museum labels disappeared overnight, how do you think most people's museum experience would change?
I think in a lot of contexts, museum labels aren't necessary, but they do like change the experience. I think like reading artwork, thinking about like art in a museum, not necessarily, well, sometimes artifacts, things from history, but text you can read directly and take it at face value, but a lot of artwork, it's kind of like a skill to cultivate reading it for, or like clues about the context. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. I am all for non-academic experiences in the art. Yeah, I think taking away the text, a lot of things become more centered around emotional experience, but sometimes that becomes inaccessible for people who need that like gateway or that bridge to interact with an artwork.
I think I would be really sad if they disappeared. It's like my favorite thing about museums, to be honest.
It's also like such hard work on the part of curators and interpretation. The amount of research that goes into those panels, it'd be disappointing.
The power of didactics. Take them away and the exhibit just feels incomplete. Paratext doesn't necessarily dictate what to think, just that there's thinking to be done, and that someone or even many people put a lot of thought into an interesting angle to start with. The next time you read didactic text on vinyl or foam core, ponder a YouTube title and thumbnail, or read the quotes and summaries on a book cover, pause a second longer, consider who wrote them, whose story is missing, and what the piece might say without that framing. In a funny way, this label really does stage a confrontation between perception and reality. It even asked interesting questions about class and race relations. The only thing it didn't do is experiment with transience and ephemerality. But this piece definitely did, which you'd only get from reading the placard. Sorry, didactic text.
I haven't checked in with the work they're doing recently. It's really hard when all of your art is from places that you took it from, but to work on decolonization